name is Amanda Rivera. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's case. The date is April 20th, 2023, and this is case DCI2022-00055. It's a rezoning request to the residential plan zoning district. Because this is a quasi-judicial hearing, all evidence and testimony must be taken under oath. So if you intend to speak today, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will provide is the truth?
Yes,
I do.
Okay, thank you. We will proceed this morning the same way as we always do. First, we're going to hear from the applicant. They'll call any witnesses that they have and explain their requests and what they're seeking today. Following that, we will hear from the county staff. They'll present their request, their review of the request, which was approval with conditions and carrying forward already approved deviations. After that, we will open up the public comment period. So if you intend to speak, it looks like I do already have a card here. I'll call you at that time to place any comments that you might have on the record. Following that, we'll come back to the applicant and the staff to provide any rebuttal testimony and any closing comments that they may have. So with that, we can get started with the applicant. Good morning.
Mr. Jalisi is going to testify today. We have the whole barrage for consultants here, but because you're familiar with this and you've seen it before, we weren't going to rehash everything we did before unless you have questions.
Okay, we'll see as we go through. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So Dan DeLisi for the record. I'm a land use planner and a consultant for the applicant, Lennar Homes. The subject property that we're talking about is approximately 26.71 acres. You could see the general location right here, west of Ben C. Pratt 6 Mile Cypress Parkway, along the Crystal Drive extension. Closer in, you could see J.V. Parker Lane right here, Blassingame, and then this is the Crystal Drive extension. So as you noted before in your opening, most of this property was previously zoned very recently, within the last year and a half or so. It was zoned over 18.55 acres of the whole property. So this property here, we added this property and most of this parcel here. It essentially squares off the development, if you will. It was pretty straightforward design around the central lake. The main access, or the only access, let me be clear on that, the only access is to the Crystal Drive extension, and that came about with a lot of discussion. I know a lot of the neighbors along Blassingame had commented to county staff, and we were asked to remove the access that we originally had to Blassingame. We did. We replaced it with an emergency-only access. In the last hearing, if you recall, there was a member of the public who spoke to talk about, how that should be designed. There was a little bit of back and forth, but with the help of the person who had come to the hearing, we then coordinated with the fire department, got the emergency access in the way that the public had wanted it. So it's, what's going on site right now, the Crystal Drive extension is being built. It's not yet paved, but it's in the process. You can see we have an active development order on the site. The site is already platted. These are the county parcel lines already on the property appraiser's website. And the horizontal infrastructure is all being put in on the site. So it is an active construction site for this initial plan development that was approved. Now the proposed zoning, as I mentioned before, it essentially squares off the site. We added another water management lake, but essentially it's the same development. We just added this area here. So the access is the exact same access. The emergency access is the exact same emergency access. It essentially remains the same plan of development. The unit count has increased from 90 to 135 units on 26.7 acres. This is incorrect. It's roughly 5.2 acres. 5 acres gross if you don't count the wetland, but the way we do it in a LEED plan is 5.2 acres. This is the criteria of approval. I can run through this very quickly. Again, the site in its current form has already been found consistent with essentially the same density, consistent with the comprehensive plan, but let me just run through this quickly. We are in the central urban land use category. The standard density range is up to 10 units an acre. As I mentioned before, we're at 5.2 units an acre. We're well within the standard density range. And you can see how the future land use map is laid out. We have central urban all around us. This over here is intensive community. So in the staff report, they did a good job of outlining how the area is transitioning over time, and that's what you would expect in this land use category. And you can see with the aerial with all the different residential communities being built up in this land use category in accordance with the land use category. As far as development, location, and timing goes, it is in an urban area. It's surrounded by urban areas. This is where the LEAP plan directs development to occur. There are no hazards on the site. It's a pretty clean, cleared site. The only wooded parcel, which I'll talk to you about in a second, is infested with exotics. It does not meet the definition of indigenous vegetation, and so there are really no constraints on site. And then I'll talk about compatibility in a second, but the surrounding uses are of similar or much higher densities. So here we are, compatibility. We are surrounded by, well, first of all, let me just say, as I mentioned before, this is a transitioning area. So you do have some historic large lot residential units in the area, and then everything is transitioning into planned developments that have higher densities. So to the south, we have a planned development that's at 12 units an acre. We have one at 13 units an acre, approximately 8 units an acre each on this, 8.4 and 7.6. Right across Blasingame, Winsong is at essentially the same density that we're asking for, 5 units an acre. And similar to this development, they have only an emergency access to Blasingame, and then their single access really is to Penzance. So as I mentioned before, we have sufficient access. We have continued to coordinate with the fire district. The staff had requested in our sufficiency process that even though we have the access approved right now as a singular access, we are increasing the unit count. We wanted to make sure that that's still fine with the fire department. We have had that coordination, and it is. So we're continuing with the single access at the request of the community to not access Blasingame. Again, as I mentioned before, we're not having any impacts to the environment. This is all exotic. It looks green, but it's not what you want. There are no new deviations being requested. All of the deviations had previously been approved. We're not asking for any changes to this. I don't really feel like we need to go through all of the 9 deviations. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to get Drew up to answer them. Just from a transportation impact, again, Steve Lung is here. He can answer any questions. But I pulled these out of his report. Both with and without the project, everything's operating at level service C. There is one staff report correction. I think my guess is it was carried over from the staff report last time. But the lot depth should be 115 feet. The lot width should be 40 feet. And that would be consistent with the existing approval. And then that is the end of my presentation.
On the one parcel that's not included, the master concept plan just showed no buffer was required. Is that an occupied structure, the residential building that's still there?
You're talking about this one? Yeah, so this is it's an existing home. The whole parcel is owned by Lennar now, and so Lennar is just keeping that home, and I think they intend to sell that independently of the community.
Oh, okay, so that's notched out, but there's not a resident that was pre-existing this development that still resides there, that's gonna be essentially having this development snake around it now?
Well, it's Lennar that owns it now, so I'm
Right.
not sure if the resident is still living there or they have vacated the premise, but Lennar owns it, and
But they're keeping it outside of this RPD?
they are.
Okay, thank you.
And, sorry, I do need to submit the PowerPoint presentation for the record. The one thing I will note with the presentation that I'm submitting is we did print out another transportation slide and a flux map in case you wanted to have Shane or Steve testify.
Okay, thank you. So that'll be applicant's exhibit 1. Thank you very much. And then you said Crystal Drive's currently under construction. Do you have any anticipated completion information on that?
I'm hearing
Soon?
I'm hearing 2 to 3 months.
It sounds soon, okay. And do you happen to have the active, you said there's an active DO, do you happen to have that number? I didn't see it referenced in any of the materials.
It was
I have it in
there?
our presentation.
Okay, thank you, then I'll get that later. Thank you, that was the extent of my questions.
Excellent, thanks.
Thank you. Whenever staff's ready. Just one's good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dirk Danley, zoning section of Lee County Community Development. I have been previously accepted as an expert witness and I'd like to do so again today.
Yes, thank you.
I'll try not to overlap with the applicant, but this is a rezoning request. Because they're adding land and adding units, they went through a full rezoning from residential plan development and agricultural to residential plan development. The deviations are all carryovers from the previous zoning approval, and staff still recommends approval of those deviations. The development order that you were asking about is DOS 2022-00055. It has been issued, and they are working with active construction, as the applicants noted in their presentation. Z21024 was the original zoning approval for the 18 acres, and the remnant 8.15 acres is agricultural land. I just wanted to talk, you asked a question about the single-family home. We asked about the same thing during the sufficiency review, just ensuring that we're having some level of compatibility. There's 2 layers to that. One, there's already a significant amount of separation. Although there's not a buffer, there is I think they're calling it a common area. And so this area already has a significant width associated with it. And then on this side, it's surrounded by a lake on 2 other sides. So it does provide a pretty significant amount of separation. And the second layer is there's enough space in that area if they decide to go through with a residential project wall that they'll have to provide the required plantings associated with that. I believe it's a 7-foot buffer on the outside of the fence. So that would also provide that compatibility. So even if they didn't provide that, we thought that there was enough separation from the existing single-family uses to this single-family use that we didn't want to impose an additional buffer on that. But this shows also just kind of a side-by-side of what's changed. This lake is going to change a little bit of dimension here. There's now residences here and here proposed, and that wraps around the property in this direction. There's no new access points that are being proposed by the applicant. It is still an emergency access only on this side, and there's a deviation proposed, or was previously approved and proposed again for this rezoning. And then just showing the context of the surrounding areas, the master concept plan will line up, this access point will line up with Oak Villages to the south, and then the emergency access will empty on the Polynesian Gym right there. Just to speak briefly on the decision-making criteria, we do think that it is compliant with the LEAP plan, and we'll go through that a little bit. and that it does meet the requirements of land development code except as deviated. And because this is a transitioning area, as has been stated in the staff report and the applicant's presentation, it is compatible with the surrounding areas. Specifically since the majority of this property has already been found to be compatible with the surrounding areas. The transportation impacts are effectively the same as they were with the previous zoning, that there's not going to be a failure of any roadway sections associated with this project. And then there's not environmentally critical areas on the property, and there are urban services associated with it. But we'll go through with the LEED plan just to kind of hit some high points. 5.2 dwelling units per acre, as the applicant did state. This is kind of right in the middle of what the future land use categories in Urban does consider. There is 0.8 acres of hydric pasture land on the property. I think that's all on the area that already has the issued development order, and anything that's associated with that or any impacts are going to be approached through wetland credits and mitigation bank credits. Sorry. As previously considered for this project, this is in an urban area that does consist of some infill in this area where there are higher density and higher intensity uses considered surrounding this property. So this is considered somewhat of an infill project, although a lot of them are all under construction right now. This is not in the coastal high hazard area or FEMA floodway. As the applicant states, we don't really find any hazards or physical constraints. They will have to meet Chapter 2 requirements as it pertains to hurricane preparedness. As we spoke before, the policy 5.1.5, we do find it to be compatible with the surrounding areas. It's not detrimental with how they're proposing it, and even with the standalone house that we have been discussing. There's significant separation and a potential for buffering if a wall goes up. We find that still provides some compatibility with, or it provides sufficient compatibility with that use, even though it is under the same ownership today. This area really is a mosaic of different types of residential uses. There's multifamily proposed in the area, single family, two family attached. It does provide for a mix, and staff does find that this does meet the intent of Goal 135 as it pertains to addressing the housing needs of Lee County. The applicant's surface water is somewhat set with the previous approved zoning and the development order, but we do find that they meet the intent of policy 125.1.2 as it pertains to degrading surface water quality and groundwater quality. And I wasn't intending on going through the deviations either, but we can talk about them if you had any questions about them. Predominantly they pertain to being in proximity to the airport. There are a handful about lake excavations and their proximity to property lines. The single point of ingress and egress allowing for an emergency only along Blasing Gym. I think that, and the way that they measure lots for some non-traditional lot shapes, they have as they've depicted on their master concept plan. But staff does recommend approval of this rezoning request, and we're here with any questions that you may have.
The only other question that tends to come up in this area besides access is the flooding and the drainage. So from what you've just said, and I think the staff report mentioned there's an existing ERP that they'll be amending.
Yes.
But staff did review the additional units that they're looking today and still found that it was consistent?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question. Did the applicant have any questions of staff?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. With that, then, we will open public comment. Sir, if you'd like to come forward. There are no comments you'd like to place on the record today? Okay, thank you. Then we will come back to the applicant and the staff. I asked all the questions that I had as I went through. Again, this case was just last year, so adding on the additional units without any external impacts to Blasing Gym and with the flooding information you just provided answered the questions I had. But if there's any final comments that anyone wants to put on the record, now would be the time to do so.
I don't think so. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well then with that, we'll conclude the hearing for today. Thank you for coming today. Sir, because you did fill out a card, you will receive a copy of the recommendation when it's received, and as well as the date when it goes before the board for final hearing. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. Stay well, please.